On throughout.
Yeah, if you want, or just once you're off, done, you know,
Okay, great.
just yeah, either way. Let me have my Mark Rubio moment.
Okay.
All right. Let me know when I'm good to go, Beth, and then I'll
Oh, she started recording.
oh, I guess when folks are coming in. And I see folks popping up.
Sorry, and now I gotta get this dog out of here, but I'm gonna be right back. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah, it's recording, but I was waiting on you to stream.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can go ahead and stream. All right. All right. I'm gonna say I think we are good to go. All right, as folks are coming in. All right. So peace. My name is Reggie Blanding. I'm a
getting some
librarian.
water out of the sink, so I had to move the thing out.
All right. Peace. My name is Reggie Blanding. I'm a librarian in the James Brown African American Room at Newark Public Library. On behalf of our library director, Christian Zabriskie, and Library Board of Trustees President, Dr. Lauren Wells, we thank you all for joining us for tonight's discussion based around our esteemed guests and recent birthday celebrator, Brea Baker's book, Rooted: The American Legacy of Land Theft and the Modern Movement for Black Land Ownership. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape First Nations on which we are learning, laboring, and organizing today. We also recognize the devastation and continued legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, which contributed to present-day systemic racism and oppression. It is equally important to acknowledge those who have, and those who continue to fight for progress to combat those systems. And we have three great people, I think, at the forefront of that here with us tonight. Blessed to have them here. So let me start off with Brea Baker. Brea Baker is a freedom fighter and writer who has been writing on the front lines for over a decade, first as a student activist and now as a writer and national strategist. Brea contributes op-eds and personal essays to various magazines, including Elle, Harper's Bazaar, and Refinery 29. As a sought-after speaker and anti-racism consultant with a BA in political science from Yale University, Brea believes deeply in political imagination and the need for nuanced storytelling. Her book, once again, Rooted: The American Legacy of Land Theft and the Modern Movement for Black Land Ownership, was published in June 2024, on Juneteenth, I believe, right?
Yeah, Juneteenth
Yes.
Eve.
Salute, by One World, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. It is stellar. It's great. I highly recommend it reading. Important text. Let me say, Brea also has essays published in anthologies like Our History Has Always Been Contraband, In Defense of Black Studies, and Devin Allen's No Justice, No Peace. Please support all that and join me in giving her a heartfelt welcome. I don't know, emojis, snap at home, whatever y'all do. Just send that energy through the waves here. Also, my honor to welcome Brother Tobias Fox. Tobias Fox is the founder and managing director of the community-driven 501c3 nonprofit organization, Newark Science and Sustainability, Inc., and founder and facilitator of the Newark Community Food System. Brother Fox has demonstrated collaborative leadership on a grassroots level for over a decade, putting in that work. He is a professional organizer, agriculturalist, visual storyteller, and coordinator of an annual Sustainable Living Empowerment Conference. Brother Fox also conducts various community events, presentations, and workshops on sustainable living practices and assists numerous urban farmers and gardeners with the cultivation of their agricultural space. More recently, he has expanded his global outreach into the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Philippines, and throughout Africa. Salute to global solidarity. Please join me in welcoming the great Tobias Fox. And last, but nowhere near least, the also awesome Noelle Lorraine Williams. Noelle Lorraine Williams lives and works in Newark, New Jersey. She is a graduate of the New School for Social Research in Rutgers University, Newark. Gang, gang. As a public humanities specialist, artist, researcher, and curator, her work examines the ways African Americans utilize culture to reimagine liberation in the United States. She has exhibited and lectured at the Newark Museum, the recently reopened Ballantine House here in Newark as well, the African American Museum in Philadelphia, Skylight Gallery in Brooklyn, and Q Art in Manhattan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She is putting in that work constantly. She is also the recipient of various absolutely deserved awards, including the Giles R. Wright Award for contributions to African American history in New Jersey, and the 2021 Individual Artist Fellowship Award for crafts from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. You can track her constantly growing legacy at www.noellelorrainewilliams.com or Black Power 19th Century on Instagram. She is also a fighter, both of them, all three fighters here. So I appreciate all of you joining us. Noelle is going to just give us some context around the Great Migration and kind of just set us off there before we lead into the conversation between Brea and Tobias. So Noelle, if you will, I'm honored to pass.
Okay. Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Reggie. And I am so happy to be here with you all, with Brea and Tobias, and all the folks who are out there in Zoom land. So one of the things I just wanted to kind of briefly start with is that when we think about land ownership in the United States with African Americans, as it is outlined in the book, it is a very long history. We see African American contentions for the land as early as the 1700s, but it really emerges in the early 1800s as African Americans are really fighting for their civil or civic rights in the United States, particularly in the North. And one of the integral parts to that is land ownership. As many of us know or may not know, a part of voting during the early part of the 19th century was connected to land ownership. So New Jersey is unique in that one could actually vote, whether you were a Black man or a Black woman in New Jersey prior to 1804, right? So in the original Constitution of New Jersey, African Americans could vote if they had the property or wealth requirement as needed. Later on, that right was actually taken away. So in many ways, the activist movement for African Americans in New Jersey is a little different from other states in that early on it was defined that land ownership was about power in so many different ways, right? So it's about wealth building, but it's also about staking claim in the North, but it is also about engaging in the democratic process. So a lot of the things that are particular um, to what we think about when we think about the North and land ownership, things such as covenants, neighborhood covenants, and redlining, um, they really do not emerge for African Americans, obviously, until the 20th century. Prior to that, you have African Americans who were either enslaved or free in the 19th century, who either were given land or purchased land. So Behind me, actually, on the screen is one of the earliest houses that was purchased by an African American, actually, that was built by an African American family in Newark, the King family. This house also served as a part of the Underground Railroad. And there were actually two or three other African American owned houses and churches. And we see this throughout the Northeast and in Manhattan and Boston. So that this conversation about land ownership started early on and has always been wedded to how people experience democracy. One of the things that's also evident is that African Americans also viewed holding on to land as an important part of their legacy. If we look at a lot of like wills and deeds from this period, for example, Christopher Rush, who was one of the leaders in the AME Zion Church, you'll look at his will and it says, this house that was like given to the church should be held on for as long as possible. So these themes of holding on to the land, right? Understanding that possessing the land, possessing a home, possessing the space was both a powerful investment, but was integral to the development of a community. And he actually says the only way that this house should be sold that was located in Newark, actually near us on the Rutgers Field, is if there's a greater investment that can be found, right? There can be more property that can be acquired. So we see that in the 1850s. Another thing we see is even before the Great Migration, which would exponentially expand the number of African Americans that were already living in New Jersey, we see African Americans moving from places like Virginia and Maryland in the late 1800s. This continues in the early 20th century, so that these communities in places like Newark, Trenton, Brooklyn, Manhattan, are actually receiving these migrants from the South, from the West sometimes, as a part of the community expanding. I think that's often absent in our discussion about land occupation, migration, et cetera, is that these African American spaces are kind of the ones who are welcoming African American migrants, as well as facilitating the opportunities to acquire land. When we look at someplace like Newark, you see the early development of the NAACP and the Urban League. They're really trying to understand the different ways they can serve the various migrants. What happens during the Great Migration in New Jersey, and many people do not know New Jersey was received one of the largest um, number of people in the north. So New Jersey received the most, or the biggest, like the kind of greatest volume of African Americans during the Great Migration. As we see increases in Newark, like in the 1930s, it goes from 16,000 to 38,000. In 1940, African Americans comprised about 10% of Newark. By the time we get to 1970, we get closer to the numbers that we know now, 54%. There are lots of kind of contentious discussions about what to do about African American migration. A little known fact is that they actually, at one point in the 1930s, considered deporting African Americans back to the South. One of the reasons that I bring this up is that it's this whole concept of always kind of seeing African Americans as not being a part of this American dream, American concept of ownership and land and connection. one of the things during this deportation proposal in Newark, to send people who were not working, who had come here to work, back to the South, was someone had to say, well, these folks are citizens of the United States. They're not citizens of the South. Um, and so we see a lot of these conversations, right? Who has access to public programs? Who has access to loans? Who has access to equitable housing? Another thing that comes up as far as like housing in the land is that you see folks who may want to live in Newark, right? Lonnie Bunch, for example, the director of the Smithsonian, his family, but where they cannot find um, decent housing for African Americans in Newark. So his family ends up moving to Belleville, or another organizer in Newark, so that you have African Americans who actually have the wherewithal to purchase land and property in Newark, and they're actually excluded from it. So we see these early trends early on, that put us in the place where we are now, where, you know, the average home ownership or land ownership in New Jersey is about, for African Americans, is 41%. The statewide average is in the 60s. In Newark, I think it's about 30% of African Americans own homes. And what this development and what the Great Migration does is it continues to shine a light on organizing, right, and the development of African American activism. Even if we look at someone like Amina Baraka, whose family comes from the South, eventually they become organizers here in Newark about housing and other key issues around wealth and housing and jobs. So those are just a couple of things that I just wanted to share to begin to contextualize this conversation about how this struggle for the land, even in the North, has been one that has been a part of the discussion for a couple of centuries.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Noel. As always, just a wealth of knowledge and very much appreciated. So yeah, thank very much. Thank you so much. I just want to say for anybody tuning in, my speakers are coming through. It's coming through pretty clear, but I do just want to let anybody know, if needed, we have enabled closed caption for the program. So I know everybody's speakers might be hitting different. But yeah, just to let you know, if you go down towards the bottom of your screen, there should be a option for the closed caption. So thank you again, Noel. Very, very much appreciated adding that context, and a great place to sort of set us off in this conversation. Hopefully you can stay and, join us in some capacity. But yeah, I just want to, I guess we'll start off with both our guests. And of course, as I always say, I like, people that do this work always say there's whatever Peter Parker moment or Clark Kent moment. So I feel like that's a good place to start there, just to talk about the flashpoint that sort of led you to your work. Whether it's just your work in general as activists, or this work specifically, Brea, in the case of the book, and Brother Tobias with your work with the Newark Science and Sustainability. So whoever may want to dive into that first. And also, I'm sorry, before we do that, I do just want to say, I know people may have questions. I see more folks are joining us. So what we're looking to do is we might be wrapping around at 7:45-ish, but about 7:30, maybe the last 15 minutes with our guest blessing. Maybe open up some space to answer some questions then. So if you have some things you'd like to ask, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to, get to as many as possible. So
I would normally respectfully allow Brea to go before me. but I want to ask Brea, is it okay? Because I'm really excited. I'm really excited to be on this panel with Brea, and I didn't know I was going to be kind of like getting these Muhammad Ali shots from Noel with this information. It's just like, wow. And so it just reminded me, man, like, one, I haven't yet mastered myself, and so much I still need to learn about the space that I live and work in, And so if you don't mind, Brea, I would love to just, because you're like, for me, you're the highlight. And so
Stop. No, no. I'm just so excited to be in conversation with you. But please, yes, go first,
okay,
please.
okay. So in 2011, I crashed and burnt out from working in the independent publishing world for about a decade, and I just it's weird because what I loved, over 10 years, turned into something I was just dreading, and became a very highly competitive, and I just wanted to change. And so I found myself without employment in 2011. And so we live in a monetary world. And so you don't have any income coming in, you have some serious problems, right? And so I found myself needing a place to live because I could no longer afford to pay my rent. I was sleeping on my cousin's couch. Thankfully, here in the U.S., we do have social systems, and so I was, one day I was just sitting across the desk from a social worker, like, look, I need some food stamps. I got to feed myself, and so these things were happening to me, and then my cousin was constantly reminding me of my social status, and that was just a lot more stress pounding on me. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I reinvent myself? Where do I go from here? And it was a friend of mine who told me about a group of people who marched on Wall Street. And this was in October of 2011, demanding economic justice. Now, I knew nothing about that. I was not an activist, none of that stuff. And so my world was like, I'm gonna be a filmmaker. I'm gonna publish and write books and all this stuff. And so, and then when I learned about this group of people who marched on Wall Street demanding economic justice, I mistook that as reparations. I was like, you know what? I am not about to get left out. It's one of the things Black people are always getting left out of. We always get the information last. I don't care what I got to do. I'm going to get over there and get my piece of the pie. And so, and so I scraped up some change, caught a PATH train over to World Trade Center, walked a few blocks down to Zagati Park, and it became a life-changing experience. It was like a rebirth for me, because I had never witnessed anything like this before in my life. I thought protests and rallies, at the time, I thought it was a thing of the past. I've come to see it as social advertisement, a tool to turn on people's social alarm system. And so I saw the large groups of people congregating in this space, this open public space, expressing their grievances. And they were developing the social systems in this space needed for a human society to exist. And so they had a people's kitchen, and it wasn't giving out charity sandwiches. They were like really cooking full square meals for people. And they had a people's library, a drum circle, a media station. And so I immediately just kind of gravitated to all of that. And I was being emotionally pulled into that space, into the conversations. I started meeting other people who were, they respected the symbolism of organizing and fulfilling or taking up public space, but they were more concerned with meeting in enclosed spaces and organizing around the grievances for some community action. And I became more interested in those types of discussions. What can we actually do to bring some change to this issue? How can we kind of elevate voices? How can we put spotlights on people's grievances so we can bring about some tangible changes? And so I started, participating in some of these meetings, just listening and absorbing and trying to learn how to become an organizer from this experience, And so in that moment, and during Occupy Wall Street, which was this whole movement, I started meeting solar technicians, electrical engineers, people who had learned how to transform or harness the sun and create electricity, harness the wind and create electricity. And I was like, wow, I want to learn how to do some of this stuff. And I was meeting farmers and like rural people who are farming in rural and in urban environments. I'm like, you're a farmer, but you're in Brooklyn. How is that possible? You know, it's like, well, we farm on rooftops, you know, vacant lots anywhere. So I'm like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And I had no knowledge of it, no skills of it, but it was pulling me, you know. And so then people started taking me under their wing and says, okay, let me show you what we do and how we do it. And I started learning the skill sets of others. And I was saying, and then a small group of people started Occupy Newark. And so it was more economical for me. At the time, I had a pedal bike. I didn't have a car. And so it was more economical for me to ride my pedal bike to downtown Newark versus how to figure out I'm going to get back and forth to New York City every day. And so I started participating in Occupy Newark. But because I have college educated and I've been involved in book publishing for 10 years. I knew how to organize in a professional realm. And so it really was easy to transfer that over into grassroots organizing, you know, bringing people together. How do we write the story so it really pulls on people's emotions so people can actually hear what we're trying to say. And so I emerged as a lead organizer within Occupy Newark. But then as I was getting exposed to sustainability and other components of sustainability around clean energy and growing food, I said, well, I want to focus on the things that are interesting me. And so I decided to start this working group. You know, it was Occupy Newark's Science and Sustainability Working Group. And it was me and about 9 other green local enthusiasts was just like, yeah, let's just start doing some stuff. You know, we was just organizing trips to organic farms, organizing clean energy technology workshops and stuff like that. And so I thought I could just get away with creating a platform for people who had these skills to kind of stand on and put them in the spotlight, and I stay in the background. And it wasn't until I learned about the City of Newark's Adopt a Lot program in 2012, where you can adopt a vacant lot for the purpose of transforming it into some type of community green space. And so you pay $1, you sign a lease, and this is not like long-term sustainability. It's like, you know, next year you don't know if you're going to have that lot or not. But still, the idea of having access to land that you can grow on in the city you live in was just like, oh my goodness, I want to do this. I've been watching YouTube videos about this. I've been hearing people talk about it in their cities and where they live. And now I have an opportunity to do it here in Newark. And so I leaped at the opportunity and helped organize a large group of people from all different places to come together to help us transform this one vacant lot that we adopted into a community garden. And I would come there each day. I would document it by taking some photos. I'm a photographer. And then I would just sit back and just watch everybody in awe, like, yeah, I helped do this. I helped do this. And then one day, these 3 middle-aged European-American women that was a part of our working group walked up to me and says, Tobias, we love what you do. You're good at working with people. But we realize every time you come here, you just watch everybody else work. You don't know nothing about gardening, do you? I says, no, I don't. And he says, well, we're going to teach you everything that we know. And so that's when I realized, like, oh, I have to get my hands in the soil as well. I can't just be, you know, an organizer in the background. I have to actually be a participant and a player as well. And so I took all that information that they were sharing with me. I coupled it with watching YouTube videos and taking some training programs and emerge as this agriculturalist that I am today. And so that was my Peter Parker, Clark Kent moment.
I love that so much. And I definitely relate. I talk in the introduction of Rooted about how I intellectualize my love for land and how I love the archivist work and I love the storytelling and I love to do the genealogical research. But when it came time for me to put my hands in the dirt, I was like, ooh, And my wife was the one to be like, girl, you got to put your hands in the dirt. You can't tell everybody else to get land and you afraid to bait your own hook, you know? So that's definitely part of the journey that I've been on. Yeah, I really relate to what you said so much, Tobias. I feel like I had various different moments of awakening and stepping into different work. I think generally as an activist, um, not even the death of Trayvon Martin was a pivotal moment because I was 18 at the time, or 17 when he was killed as well. And so looking at him and being like, okay, I can see a parallel world where I am the teenager living in Florida, or my brother is the teenager living in Florida. But it was really the acquittal of George Zimmerman that was like, oh, wait a second, we're going to let him get away with that. And that's what this justice system does. And so that led to my activist journey. But for quite some time, I really centered my work, and I considered it racial justice work, but it was always centered around police and prisons. And that's really important work to me. I still do it. But I realized that I was leaving so many people out because the majority of Black Americans in 2024 still live in the South, even after the Great Migration. And my grandparents being two of them, and my elders being some of them, and realizing that I was not speaking to or advocating for the things that they were experiencing, which was this like systematic land theft. And I'd always grown up knowing that my family had land. So in some ways I had taken it for granted until, kind of like what you were saying, Noel, my grandfather's passing away, and on his deathbed, he's like, don't sell this land. And so that's a big moment for us as a family, that through our grief, we're holding on to this acreage that meant so much to him, that was the site of so many special moments for us, and we really wanted to make sure that we were preserving it. So I would say that his death was what really pushed me into and helped me see that even if I grew up in New York, or even if I'm the child of a Patterson, grad like my dad is, like that, that we have these Southern ties, and it's important that we not forget about the South, and that we don't relinquish the South to racists and to white supremacists and to legislators who want to lasso the South into submission. So I kind of got to this place where I was like, wait a second, I can't be thinking I'm so much better up here in the North, as if what happens in the South and what's perfected in the South on Black Southerners doesn't eventually come back and get us too. And so all of that happened in 2019, and that really pushed me to do more research and more understanding of why holding on to land intergenerationally meant so much to my grandfather. And in that work, discovered that the first Black person in my family to own land was my great 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 grandfather, less than a decade after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. And thinking of all that it took for a Black man in the 1880s to acquire 336 acres of land with his wife, to hold on to that land long enough to pass it on to his sons, who passed it on to their children, and for some of that to still be in the family. It just made everything feel very full circle for me, and feel as though, even if my experience, I didn't grow up feeling like a wealthy Black family, right? We're still a working class family who happens to have some land in the South. And there is still a wealth in that, and there's still a safety net in that, and there's still power in that. So that was my journey, was in reclaiming my grandparents' connection to the South.
All right, thank you both for those great answers, and I love both of those origin stories, and it's it's interesting because I was talking to someone yesterday about Rooted, to a friend of mine, and telling him about the program, and I think he said something about, I don't read a lot, but I do a lot of stuff on YouTube, and my brain sort of went to a place of like, oh, but I love that connection to bias and how that work fed what you're doing. So it's, and also I'm someone who constantly jumps on YouTube when I need to do or learn certain things, and I'm trying to read away, and it's very useful. So thank you for just adding that and sharing both of your stories of how y'all came to do this work. One place I wanted to just kind of jump into, this is a very rich book, so there's an hour and some change. We ain't gonna get it all, but the book is there for purchase, so please support this amazing work. But since Noel kind of kicked us off with the Great Migration, if you wouldn't mind kind of just picking up on that. I know there's a lot of sort of spatial up in the well. Yes, yes, yes. The copy. But so I wanted to just kind of get into, for a little bit of how you approach the Great Migration in the book. We often talk about the cities and the spaces, but you sort of say that's one viewpoint, but it leaves out a broader
Yeah.
aspect of the book. So if you can just speak to that.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of the book because I think it's so core to my unraveling and how the research I was coming upon helped me rethink so many different moments in US history. Civil rights movement, just anything that happened in the 20th century was shaped by the Great Migration. And we know that to an extent, but we still talk about it almost in an exclusive way of how it shaped the North and the West. And we don't really think about what that meant for the South. It's kind of similarly like when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, we talk about how it transformed the Americas. But like, what about a continent or a region that just had masses of people leaving? And in the South, what that looked like was number one, a loss of strength in numbers. Well, actually, let me go back in time because first and foremost, I really leaned on some of the work of Isabel Wilkerson and how she reframed the way we talk about the Great Migration. Because we kind of talk about it like, oh, I got a new job in Chicago and I'm just going to get on the train and go. And it's like, no, people were fleeing in the middle of the night. When you do that, there's no time to say, I want to move. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to sell my farm. I'm going to sell my property. You leave with what you can carry. You often try to leave inconspicuously. So even if you could carry more, you're like, well, I don't want to signal to people that I'm leaving, right? So many people are leaving, fleeing danger and don't want the danger to follow them. So it's very much like, how can I leave literally like a thief in the night, to bring in, Christian terminology. So that mindset is really important because when you look at statistics that I draw on in the book, which say that the height of Black land ownership was around 1910, 1920. And all of that, or most of that wealth was held in land holdings in the South. And then you have masses of Black people leaving the South. The land doesn't come with them. The wealth doesn't come with them. The land stays in the South, and new people become wealthy off of that land that was left behind or was what had to be left behind. So that's number one, is the people who were fleeing as domestic refugees often did not start that way. These were farm owners and landowners and business owners, lawyers and doctors who had studied in HBCUs and carved out lives for themselves and were pushed out of the South and the Southwest during moments like the Tulsa Massacre, the Wilmington Massacre, the Red Summer of 1919. Like, white supremacist violence is forcing people out of communities and enclaves that they've built a lot of wealth in. And they're leaving with only the rags on their back and hopefully as many loved ones as are still living, but again, their wealth still stays, and not with loved ones who are still there. Oftentimes, it's white people who take that. So that was an important thing. But then, for those who are not fleeing from direct, massacres and KKK violence and things of that nature, there is still this loss that happens in the South, because right around the time that Black people are getting the ability to negotiate for their labor. And I think that's another thing we don't really think of. The end of slavery marked the beginning of a multiracial labor movement in the US. Because before that, Black people were not allowed to negotiate their labor, to say, hey, that's not a fair wage. Hey, these are unfair working conditions. Hey, I deserve to be treated in this way. But all of a sudden, Black people are able to do that. And it didn't happen immediately because there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of fear and sharecropping and things of that nature. But over time, Black people are coming together, are unionizing informally and formally, are joining white unions and forcing their way in, and are starting to say, we're not gonna work. We're not gonna work until we get more money. And then all of a sudden, Black people are forced out of the South. There isn't the strength in numbers anymore. So now, whereas there used to be a whole community of Black planters and farmers and land stewards and sharecroppers who were able to negotiate because we're all going to stop working. Now, all of a sudden, it's like, well, we're going to replace the labor force anyway because we need to, because Black people are leaving. So you can also be replaced. And it kind of the Great Migration kind of undercut that like burgeoning labor movement. And so it leaves a lot of Black people in the South very vulnerable. And I think of my great grandfather in that way. And when my grandfather was living, he often spoke of his father just as though he let things happen to him. He let white people do things. He wasn't being vigilant enough. He wasn't being careful enough. He wasn't, he was drinking too much. He was gambling too much. And I don't think my grandfather totally understood that to be a Black landowner at the time when my great grandfather was a landowner was to be on an island of your own, because you didn't have other landowners around you typically who thought and looked like you. And so you were sort of like you had to defend yourself and like stake your claim and be very vigilant. And there's so many different attacks, some very open, some, I think my great grandfather refused to go to like pharmacists in that county because he was nervous about what they might be doing, and he only ate his own food, and like there's that version of like the paranoia that is really founded. But then there's also the real recognition that there is eminent domain and USDA discrimination and heirs property discrimination, all coming from different angles, trying to kick you and your kids off the land. And you're trying your best to hold on to it all you can. But the less Black people in the South that have economic and political power, the easier it is to say, well, we're the ones who are really in control, and we'll gerrymander it. We'll do this and we'll do that, and make it really hard for you to have a livelihood. So it's best that you just kind of keep your head down and don't start too much trouble. And that coinciding with the civil rights movement, when all of a sudden sharecroppers and Black Southerners are boycotting white businesses and are demanding their just due, it forces a lot of people into fearful silence. So the Great Migration had a lot of shifts on the South. And I think this idea that Southerners, I think we only think of Southerners like the Rosa Parkses and the Martin Luther Kings, and not the farmers and the sharecroppers who, in the face of, such insane odds and without the numbers that existed in the major cities, were often going up against these powers alone.
That's great. Thank you. Just, of course, a lot of threads to pull there. One, I just want to backtrack to as the sort of the, I guess, multicultural fight in that, and that brings me to a question. I was thinking of Tobias because, of course, in the introduction, we talked about global solidarity and the importance of outreach and allyship. And I did just want to, before we get into the book, I know Brother Tobias had some great questions he came with, but I did want to just discuss, of course, there's that term I think we mentioned, think globally, act locally. So if we can kind of just discuss some of the work that you've done abroad and how that has helped and fed the work you're doing here in Newark, things you've learned.
Yeah, no doubt. So I do want to, I also, before I share that, I want to get into some of the history I carry about land and land ownership, because that narrative is a little different. So my mother was she was raised in the New Jersey, the northeast part of New Jersey, and my father and his siblings, they are from Raleigh and Durham, North Carolina, and they came to Newark in the '60s for they were seeking better opportunities, And so, but none of them were farmers. There was no stories about farmers, anything, or agriculture in my household growing up. I'm a '70s baby. I was birthed, out of the whole Black Power movement, and I kind of made it through and survived through the '80s of the crack era and Reagan politics, and danced my way through the '90s, And so it's like I've seen a lot of transitions, in Black culture, and growing up in East Orange, right outside of Newark, there were no farmers in my neighborhood. The relationships that we were told that we need to establish in the community were with our barbers and the grocers, because we needed to always have credit. I grew up in a household of 16, so food insecurity was at the top of the list. And so it would have been great if we would have been some farmers during that time in that large household, right? Um, but the narrative associated to land, and that narrative that I grew up with was home ownership, not land ownership. When people talk about, land ownership, to me, it was sounded so abstract. Like what land? What are we going to do with that? Going to build a house, right? Because that's what we were told. And so when I started this work organizing and around healthy food access and urban agriculture, and created this organization, North Science Sustainability Inc. Even the people in my circle that I network with in Newark, um, when they talked about when the subject of land ownership came up, it was almost a feared topic because it was like, whoa, how much is that going to cost? It's like, no, let's just stick with this, this leasing thing that we're doing. Let's just stick with that. And then when I became more knowledgeable about the benefits of land ownership, I had to kind of figure out a way of how to help the people that I'm collaborating with change their mindset about land ownership as well. Because for most of us, growing up in cities, it's like, well, we don't understand that connection of land and what it offers us, aside from home ownership. And so it was in 2017 when I do an annual Sustainable Living Empowerment Conference, and there was a brother in the audience who wanted to meet me. And so he's like, Tobias, I heard some great things about you. I also heard some not so great things about you, but I want to, learn for myself, what you are, who you are, and how I can assist you. And so he asked me, he says, what do you see your organization 5 years from now? And this is in 2017. And so I said, well, 5 years from now, I want to expand my organization from being this kind of grassroots-led organization in Newark to become statewide with global outreach. And so he says, well, how you plan on doing that? You don't have any land, you don't have a head facility. I'm like, well, you didn't ask me how, you just asked me where do I see myself 5 years from now. And then he said, well, look, I'm a housing developer, and I would love to be able to sit on your board and guide you through the process of owning land. And if he would not have came into my life, I probably would have been clueless to this day about the benefit of having land, how to use land. And so the image you see behind me is what we are currently building up in Newark, from the land that we recently purchased from the city. And to directly answer your question, we think global, act local, and I call that global. And so this work has allowed me to visit other countries, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, the Philippines, and it's allowed me to kind of connect more with agricultural practices outside of the United States. And it uh, and it always comes back to people in these other countries, especially low-income countries. They have a strong connection with not only just the land, but the people who are stewards of the land, the people who are responsible with growing the food. I mean, they are like family. They know these people by names. They come and stop by their houses. They drink their morning coffee with these people. And so I kind of yearn for that type of relationship to return back to where I am here in Newark, and so how can we change that narratives of people's minds about land access, land ownership, and how land kind of serves us and how we serve the land as well.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for listen, I don't even think we that fully in, but just a wealth of information here. Thank you again to Noel, who was I think will be tuning in and joined us at the top of the program. Noel Lorraine Williams, and program on streaming on Facebook Live, on Zoom, and see we'll have on YouTube. Um, so I want to backtrack here. I'm trying to access some of the questions Brother Fox had, but I guess we do want to get
Yes.
to the process of the book, this very important book. So if I'm having trouble accessing the questions that you had earlier, so if you can just
I can ask because for
yeah,
me, it is I started not only reading the book, I also started listening to the audio version of the book.
Oh, I love that.
And so it was like, and then I watched a interview you had with a woman on YouTube. And so because I really wanted to, try to like get into the writer's mind,
Mm,
and so my educational background consists of creative writing, filmmaking, book publishing. I'm also a photographer. And so, so the artist and how the artist live and how the artist creates is always exciting to me. It's the story
mm.
that the artist lived through is what I become more interested in. And so for me, it's like the title alone is very, um, I'm curious, how did you come up with the title? Did you start writing the book from the title? Did you find the title as you started?
No, definitely not. I started writing the book. It happened so randomly, in my opinion, in a way that makes me feel like there was something bigger than me directing things, someone bigger than me directing things. I definitely believe that because my grandfather had just recently transitioned, that he was up there orchestrating things because I had been doing, after he passed away, I'd been doing genealogical research into our family's land just from a place of grief. And I had also, so that was in 2019. And then during that time, my now wife and I were engaged and we're thinking about where we'd want to get married. And for a lot of different reasons, we were like, well, maybe not a church, and let's find a space that we don't have to worry about whether they'll be affirming and accepting of us. And then like something in me was like, what if we got married on my family's land? And the moment that I said it, it was like, that has to be what it is. It feels so special. It will connect me to him. So at the time, as I'm doing this genealogical research from a place of grief, I'm also planning a wedding on this land. So I'm visiting the land a lot more. I'm sitting with my grandmother a lot and asking her questions. My aunt is driving me around to different places to see where it can go. I'm talking to local vendors. I'm just spending a lot more time in North Carolina. And then fast forward to 2021, it's the 100-year it's the centennial anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. And I get asked to cover it for Elle and to write about it. And so I write this account of how horrific that moment was, how it is indicative of a lot of violence that Black Americans have endured, and why it calls to question, what are we doing to repair that kind of harm? That 100 years out, there are survivors still recounting their stories in a courtroom trying to get restitution and having that denied. That should not be. And so I wrote an article about that, and an editor reached out and was like, hey, I'm curious if there's a book that you'd want to write kind of similar to this. Your article really spoke to me. And I was like, well, Tulsa, that's not my story. I don't think I'd write a whole book about a community I'm not from. And I think that story is for someone else from that community or a descendant from that community to tell. But I do have a connection to land theft generally, and maybe there's something there. And so I start thinking about how could I weave because I don't want it to be a memoir, and not to discredit those who do write that, but that's just not where I was at personally. And I was just thinking, how can my family story be woven to and be additive and be helpful? And I think it kept calling out to me that even Black Americans don't believe that we will get reparations, not just in our lifetime, but at all. And that's something that has to change. We have to change the way we think about it. We got to think about reparations as inevitable, as a necessity, it's like the litmus test for whether someone is an ally to our community is, do you support restitution for chattel slavery, Jim Crow, South violence, and 20th century land theft? Like, I think that's a very low bar, in my opinion. And considering we keep finding money for foreign governments and the Pentagon and everything else, I think that reparations is not too much to ask for a country that has received so much from us. So that's where the book came from. And initially I was going to call it Black Land Matters, because I had been called to racial justice work through the Black Lives Matter movement. And now I was realizing that Black life and Black liberation was so tied to Black land, both home ownership in the North, but land ownership in the South, and again, when I was thinking of land ownership, it wasn't this idea that every Black person should be a farmer and we should all have a farm right now. That would be beautiful if that's what people want. But to me, it's more that 100 years ago, a white person had land that they passed on to their child, who passed on to their child. And even if their great grandchild doesn't have that land anymore, they were able to liquidate it and sell it and do something else with it. And that's a birthright that we should have had as well. We should have inherited something that was able to increase exponentially in value, that was able to nourish us, but also be an investment tool and an equity tool. And we didn't. And so now there's like compounded harm because we have not had any real chance. Anything that Black Americans have built has truly been by picking up our own bootstraps. This federal government has not ever intervened to truly make amends for the fact that we have worked extremely hard to build wealth for others to benefit from. And so that's what the book was. And that's why I wanted Black Land Matters. But when I sold the book to my editor, and in hindsight, I'm glad that she made this, because Leah Penniman has a book called Farming While Black, and her introduction is called Black Land Matters. And I hadn't remembered that at the moment. So I'm glad that we didn't have that like
Me too.
but my editor was like, well, I think it should be its own standalone title. Maybe you should think of something else that doesn't play into an existing abbreviation or something else. And my wife was like, well, what about Rooted? It's tied to land. It reminds me of Alex Haley and all these things. And I'm like, that's good. I like that. And I just went with it. I didn't consider anything else. So my wife came up with the title after I'd already sold the book.
Well, thank your wife for me. That was very clever. And I love the title. And I was just curious to know, sometimes, people write from the title. Sometimes they say, well, you know what? It's just a working title. I'm going to let the title come to me as I write.
Right.
That's good. And so there's an audio version of the book.
Yeah.
And the voice that I'm hearing, is that your voice?
Yes. I did get to narrate it. Yeah.
How did that happen?
So I don't know if this is the case with everyone, but the publisher.
I'm used to hearing actors.
Yeah, right.
All this drama, it's like, wait, this sounds like the author.
Yeah. So with fiction, that is almost always what happens, because you do have different characters to give voices to. So there might literally be various different actors who voice act for a specific character, or there's one really amazing voice actor who is trained in the work that they do, and they can contort their voice to take on those different voices. With nonfiction, as far as I know, the publisher will extend the invitation to the author first and ask if they would like to narrate their own book. And if the author is like, look, that's not my ministry, that's not what I'm good at, I don't have the right voice for it, they can be like, I would love to just hire someone else. And then there's a budget for that. And they'll hire, and you can like interview voice actors and whatnot. I think if I ever dug into fiction, I definitely would not do that myself. I cannot do it.
Sounds really good.
Well, I appreciate you, but I feel like it worked because I was talking about my family story and then, history. But like, if it was like, a YA novel or something like that, like I feel like I'd want someone like Cree Summer, like a dope voice actor who can make their voice sound like this, and then like who can do all of the stuff that I can't do.
So I hear you, but you sound very good. You sound very good.
Thank
and
you.
I mean, were there any like coaching going on? Was there like did you take any acting courses to help you with this?
I did not, and now I'm like, ooh, should I have done that? Do people do that?
No, you sound is very professional. You were pausing, and then you were like just the build up. It was awesome. It's a very vivid, very vivid. Your story is very vivid, and although it's fiction, I can see how someone can miscategorize it as creative nonfiction or a memoir, because it reads like a journey. Like you're taking us on this journey, and I almost felt like, should I be reading this? Like she's revealing too much, like. And says, wow, and then the historical references that you put into context. It's just like, for me, it was like, man, this is. I want to say thank you, because you helped me understand the difference between rural land ownership and the world I operate in, which is this city land ownership. Two different narratives. I mean,
Yeah.
lands, the land mass is much different, and
Yeah.
so you really it just helped me better understand the two different worlds. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you saying that. And that was something I had to come into myself, because that's the difference that my grandfather would speak to. And it's also another loss that we had during the Great Migration. I think that was a culture shock for a lot of those who migrated north and west, was growing up on land that fed you, nourished you, like literally fed you, where you grew your own food, and then moving to a city where you're expected to go to a grocery store to buy it. And so now, even like paying a premium for organic food was something that my grandmother was like, I can never get over that, because I used to grow up picking my own cucumbers. Why would I pay extra for someone else? Like, it doesn't make sense. It should be organic. That's how it comes out of, that's just how it should come out of the earth. And so thinking about how much we are conditioned and like programmed to accept the bare minimum, that there are people living in these food deserts, or as Karen Washington calls, it's food apartheid, where
Right.
you are corralled into areas where you are like surviving off of delis, bodegas, and fast food, and there's not substantive fresh produce that you can get, or that the farmers who are trying to grow those crops are not being incentivized to, because in states like North Carolina, they just want everyone growing tobacco, soybeans, and cotton.
Right.
And that's where the subsidies are. So if you're someone who's trying to grow food that people can eat, then you're not going to benefit from those incentives. So I learned a lot about how homeownership is a vehicle for wealth, for sure, but rural land ownership was that generational. That was no matter what happens anywhere else, there's land for you to come back to. There's a family compound with several homes and
Right.
a lake, and you can hunt and you can grow, and that's different. And even if you don't live on it, having access to it, seeing the way that white families are able to build wealth because they're able to lease their land for solar and wind. And we
Right.
don't have the ability to participate if we don't have the land to be part of that. So that's something I learned too.
Good point. And these are topics that I'm exploring with my organization. We have a clean energy training program, and that was actually one of the topics of last week. These companies are coming into farmland, and the farmers are able to lease out that farmland to have solar panels on their farmland.
I'm trying to get
So,
into that myself. I've been learning about it, and I'm like, I see it every time I go back to North Carolina. I just see rows and rows of solar panels, and I'm like, how much have they paid? Like
yeah.
but we don't get to participate in those parts of the economy. And that's the last thing I'll say on this, is like every time that the economy shifts, we are like left behind. So like at first, this is an agricultural economy. We become the
Right.
wealthiest nation in the world because of agriculture. And then the
Right.
Industrial Revolution happens, and they start
Right.
replacing human beings working in farms with chemicals and machinery and tractors and these things that can do the work 10 and 15 times as fast. And so
Right.
where does that leave us? And so then we try to work in the factories, and then they automate those jobs away. And
Right.
now it's AI and renewable energy. And if we don't have the skills or the land to participate, then we're stuck being like, how can I buy stock in what y'all are doing? But
Right.
that's not where the real wealth is built. That's not where I'm setting up my grandkids with a trust that they just know that there are things they won't have to worry about. And that's the kind of things that, or when we do that, it gets ripped from under us. You build out this life for yourself. You have a business in a major northern city, and they build a highway through it, right? And they take your land. So there's just all of these ways that our dreams get snatched from under us. And I get that it can be exhausting, and it's so important that we never relinquish our right to be participants, because the economy was built on our backs. Now it's time to make it work for us.
Amen to that. And I am on the grounds trying to make that happen. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you for it. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you for this book, for revealing your family story through your narrative. It's awesome. So you have chickens.
I got chickens. Yes, yes. My wife and I
Me
got
too.
chickens last year. How many you got?
I had 10.
Okay.
One passed on from heat exhaustion. I got the chickens in June. I didn't know what I was doing. So I learned how to make the chickens much happier
Yeah.
and healthier. And so I've learned my quickly. I am getting some coaching from here and there, but we have some Rhode Island red
Got
hens,
some Rhode Island Reds. Yeah.
and they are giving me about up to 9 eggs a day. So
Nice.
yeah, and I'm able to introduce this to people in the community, residents that live close by. So in Newark, in certain communities in Newark, I mean, there's just this new generation and population of people from Central America, especially Ecuadorians, Guatemalans, um, and so it's cool. So some of the children come over and can I water the garden? Can I play with the chicken? And it's pretty cool. It's pretty good.
That's
And
my
then the
favorite part of it too, is exposing people to possibilities, because I was not like my wife when we more recently lived in Brooklyn before we were in Atlanta. We've been in Atlanta in the Georgia area for 5 years, but before that we were living in Brooklyn together. She worked at an urban garden, and they a community garden, and in Queens they had some chickens, and I'd go to visit her at the garden. She's like, you should hold one of the chickens. I'm like, I'm not interested, that's not for me. But it takes exposure over time, because if you've lived in a place where your only green spaces are a park, like you're not exposed to
right,
livestock. I'm not comfortable around goats, you know what I mean? So it
right,
takes exposure over time. And I love when my friends come over with their kids and I'm like, yeah, bring them down to the chicken coop, let them see, how they are, like what they eat, what they drink, ask questions, where do the eggs go? We have 8 hens.
mm,
We had 11 chickens up front,
okay,
and we wanted only hens. And then as they got older, we were like, uh-oh, we got some roosters. And I have at the time we had a baby on the way. And though, if anyone knows roosters, like in the movies, they only cock-a-doodle-doo in the mornings.
right.
Roosters do that all
Uh,
day,
yeah,
all
I'm
day.
in travels. Yeah, I visit other countries. I'm in the agricultural parts of the countries, and I literally have to leave the rural parts to
Yes.
go to the city to rent a hotel room for a few days so I can get some sleep.
No, for real, it's real. It's real. And I was like, okay, we're not doing that. So we had fried chicken for dinner one Sunday because our roosters, rest in peace, are no longer in
Oh
our
my
garden.
God, you get a lot of hate messages now from the vegans, but go ahead.
Listen, I was about to say, but I respect the vegans. I think it's important, but I also think, this is an important part too, is I my connection to land is very ancestrally driven.
Mm,
And Black and Indigenous people have always been sustainable people, have
right,
always said, if we have to butcher an animal, we're going to use all of the parts. The bones are going to become weapons. Every piece of meat is going to be used, and what's not used is going to become part of nourishing the ground again, right? Like we're using as much as possible, or it's going to be bait, or it's going to be whatever.
right.
And my issue is with with the factory farming of livestock, with the
Absolutely.
way that treat cows and chickens and other livestock are treated in this country. But
Right,
small farming operations or backyard operations like what my wife and I have, like what you have, are so, like, our chickens are living some of the best lives that chickens could live, right? Like
absolutely,
my chickens are
absolutely.
eating pineapple and watermelon, they getting ice in their water. Like these chickens
Yeah.
are living
Oh, they
great,
fancy. They fancy.
great, fabulous lives. They eat better than some
Yeah.
Americans,
Right.
And I
Each
think that
egg is worth $20. Each egg
right,
is worth.
look, exactly, exactly. But I think that's important for people to remember, that not every coexistence with animals needs to be an inherently like toxic relationship. And this idea that
Right,
humans are inherently bad is like not it's just not true for how Black people have existed. We have been able to coexist with animals and with the environment for centuries on this continent and on others. And I
right,
lean into that like there is a way to eat meat and to raise livestock and to garden and it be sustainable. And there
right.
are ways that vegans love to pretend and have a moral high ground and don't talk about the human cruelty that is involved in getting their vegetables and produce to their plates. So that's another thing. It's like, okay, if we're talking about animal cruelty, what does it mean for farm workers in California to be picking strawberries and being paid $3 a day and being sprayed with
Yeah,
pesticides and catching and being diagnosed with cancer? Like that's part of the
that's real.
conversation where it should be, you know?
That's real. And
So,
that's real. And so one of the exposures that I got, the first exposure I got to my um, broad experience
mm,
is the chemicals that are so harmful to the farmers, and most of them are Black farmers from Haiti,
yeah,
and they, you know, end up with cancer. Their lives are
yeah,
cut short. You know,
yeah,
it's yeah, and that's one of the things that really kind of ignited some of the global work that I do is
mm,
how do I spread how do I spread organic farming practices without sounding like a column, like a, like I'm just trying to like take over or something. Like, how do I do that, respectfully? So
yeah.
yeah. But how's the book doing?
It's doing good. To me, of course, there's sales metrics and lists and things like that to focus on. But to me, I wanted young Black people to read the book and be encouraged to talk to their elders. I wanted older Black people to read the book and see that young people care and want the baton to be passed to us. And
Yes.
I wanted to spark conversation between us and our allies about what the fight for reparations looks like. We're in a place where we're still arguing over whether to study reparations. Like that's what the bill in Congress is. It's not to execute reparations. And so I think that we're so behind in the conversation. It's beyond studying. And I want more of us to see that and feel as though there's enough proof out there to affirm our right to this. And that we just need to go after it. And I also think we're in a place where reparations is starting to happen all around us. We've got eminent domain reversals like the Bruce's Beach campaign in Los Angeles. There are reparations task forces everywhere from Asheville, North Carolina to California. There are conservation groups and land trust groups that are giving land back to Indigenous and Black people. So I think that as it's starting to happen in waves and in pilot programs, we need to be more clear on what we want it to look like so that
Right.
we can control that, so that it's not just like, wait, and now it's happening and we didn't get to say whether this is something we wanted. And I think it's important that we don't leave land out of the conversation. I think some of us have focused only on a check, and I think a one-time check is not a wealth builder. And I think
Right.
Black people need assets and investments to be granted from the government in atonement for the assets and wealth that was taken from us. So that I feel great because I think that those conversations are happening partly because of the book. I think that, when I go to book tour stops and I see Black elders being like, thank you for telling this story. This happened here too. And we don't talk about it. And we're afraid to talk about it. Or we just didn't think there was anything to be done. So it was just like, why even bother? And giving people a reason to feel hopeful again is something that I feel really good about.
I hope there's I hope to see this book in some of the college campuses.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really, really touched by the way you was delivering the story. It wasn't. I thought it was going to be this really boring kind of a nonfiction read, but I was like, this is very interesting. This is moving. It's very
Thank
moving.
you.
So yeah,
I
no,
appreciate that.
thank you, because it really helps with some of the things that I'm working on, working and people I'm working with, and how to kind of use some of your language.
I'm glad. That's what I want it to be an organizing tool. I want folks like you to be like, you know what? This book makes my life a little bit easier when it comes to communicating things because a lot of money is coming down right now for climate justice work,
Oh,
for
absolutely.
reversing environmental injustices, and Black people should be on the forefront. I mean, I joke and I'm like, every Black family has the sink full of plastic bags. Like, I mean, we have been reduce, reuse, recycle people from the beginning of time.
Right.
And it should not be that we are learning about sustainability or taking the lead on sustainability from white startup founders. Like it should be Black and Indigenous people first and foremost that we're learning from. And our ancestors have the answers. And even if I don't know everything right this second, what I think is beautiful is the opportunity to remember and to relearn it and to feel closer to our elders in that way.
Right.
And to know that, like, even when we think of, I talk about maroon communities in the book, I talk about,
Yes, you do.
fugitive enslaved people. When you think
Yeah.
of how Harriet Tubman is able to flee and run and bring others with her consistently, how in touch with the natural world around her she had to be, how she was able to read the stars and the grass and find water and know when it was time to hide and what would help hide you, what you could eat, what you couldn't eat. That is expertise. And we don't talk about it like that. We talk about our ancestors like they were these like damsels in distress, but they were experts on land cultivation. And they brought that expertise with them from the African continent. They sharpened it on some things are different here, but some things are the same. And then they learned American land better than the people who brought them here. Right. I think that is so powerful that we could learn a land that we were forcibly brought to and learn to love it better than the people who brought us here. And we are still loving it more than them. And we are still better stewards of it. So we should, why not us to be the landowners? I mean, if that's a home for someone, and if you're like, listen, I just want my condo with a little backyard, that's your business. But it's your right to have access to the natural world. And we talk about things as if they're white people stuff, right? Like skiing and hunting and hiking and kayaking. And it's like, no, that's our stuff. Like being out in nature is us, and it's good for our bodies. It's good for our wellness. It's good for our minds, and it's good for the planet. So I see reparations as an economic justice policy, as a racial justice policy, and as a climate justice policy, because what's good for Black people is good for the planet.
Amen. Are you working on a part 2 or anything like that for the story?
Listen, I want to do more for sure. I have no idea when it'll get to that place, but I don't want this to be the last of it. I think I spent a lot of time in this book talking about the history of Black land ownership, and I alluded to the more modern movements, but I think there's definitely a part of me that, there's people who are currently referring to, there's a lot of Black people moving back down south. I'm part of that migration.
Right.
And there are people calling it the new Black migration or all sorts of things. And I've been referring to it as the Great Return, because we're coming back for what's ours. We're coming back with a lot more power, a lot more economic control. And I think that's a really powerful thing to happen. Charles Blow put out a documentary about what that could do and how that could shift politics in the South. Leah Penniman and Camille Dungy and so many others are doing work to encourage Black people to see the South as a place for them. Amani Perry, South to America. So I think there's a part of me that wants to add to more of a chorus of voices and encourage Black people, even if you don't want to live here full time, but don't say things like, just give Florida to white people. Like, no, that's a homeland for so many of us. And we shouldn't be so quick to let white people have what's ours. So I think there's part of me that wants to write that too.
Well, I hope you do.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
This is amazing. Man, this is great. I wanted to just highlight, I know I said I was thinking of 7:30 to maybe jump into some questions, but I wanted to pull a few things from the Q&A, and first of all, salute to everybody joining us, leaving comments in the chat here and on Facebook. So, and there's one comment that or question/comment I see here. Actually, let me go by the comment first from Virginia. Just listen to NPR's Reveal, 40 Acres and a Mule podcast, which touched on so many of these issues Brea is addressing as well. From Virginia also is and someone else on Facebook, they're asking just how can we support and encourage Black land ownership, or what is the modern movement for Black ownership? So as we're digging in the archives, who's sort of building on to the new archives, modern movements to establish this. So if you could highlight.
Yeah, Tobias, I number one, consider you part of this movement and people like you doing this work. I think anytime you hear of an urban garden, a community garden, those are all versions of of Black land ownership and encouraging it. And again, so much of it is just exposure and desensitizing and like reminding us that it's okay to have our hands in the dirt. And so any projects that do that are really important to me. I love the work of Soulfire Farm and Leah Penniman. I've mentioned her a few times here, but she kind of does that as well, where they do retreats over the summer where people of all ages, from kids and teenagers all the way through to adults and elders, can come out to the land for 1 and 2 week intervals and learn about how to work land. And I think that kind of exposure, it plants a seed in people. It like a figurative and a literal seed, like where people are like, oh, I want to do that again. And I want to try that. I want to grow something on my, balcony and in my windowsill. And once you start, then you start wanting more. And I think it's an important step for people realizing that you do deserve more, even if it's going to be a shared community plot, that we deserve access to green spaces, I think is important. But yeah, some of the other names that I mentioned, Charles Blow is literally encouraging Black people to move back down south as a political strategy to kind of like take over states that are currently red and purple. And he kind of uses Georgia as a model, that young Black people were moving back to Georgia in such high numbers that we were able to flip the Senate. And imagine if we did that in other places. And he talks about how white hippies did that in the 70s with Vermont, and it's still showing. They have a representative in the Senate like Bernie Sanders in a part of the country that is very conservative. And that's because of the way that they were able to sort of like use land ownership as a vehicle for kind of hacking the political system. So it's interesting to see how that kind of work goes. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Where Is My Land? Where Is My Land and Kavan Ward is the woman and the organization behind the Bruce's family getting their land back in California. After the success of that campaign, so many families flooded their website with requests to say, hey, my family has proof that land was taken from us. Can you help us get our land back? So she started an official organization, Where Is My Land? You can find them on all social media and their website, whereismyland.org. They have many active campaigns right now, everywhere from New York, New Jersey, Texas, North Carolina, California, Ohio, active campaigns trying to get Black people their land back. And so if you're someone wanting to support the movement for land back for Black people and reparations for Black people, you can go to their website, sign every petition they have, donate to them, stay connected to their work, stay following their work, because they're really proving that reparations is possible. And this idea that it's too hard to trace is a myth. And there are Black people, and specifically Black women, proving that we can trace it. So those are some of the people I see pushing it. But in the last few chapters of the book, I really do talk a lot about so many other nonprofits and organizers, guerrilla gardeners, and people, using different language to refer to, there's highway space. Why don't we use the green spaces of the highways better and grow food there? There are abandoned jails and prisons. Why don't we, take over those former, jails and prisons and use the land in better ways? And so there's lots of really interesting and innovative projects that are happening in every state across the country. And so I hope people are encouraged to look into more of those and find the activations nearest to you.
That's great. Thank you. I'm just going to highlight a couple comments as I'm scrolling through. I'm just seeing like the chat is jumping, but thank you, Bob Hayes, who I saw earlier, shared a link to Rooted through Penguin House and a Goodreads link as well. He also says everyone likes chickens. We are finding that it's amazing what they can eat too. So throw back to our earlier discussion. He also says thanks for providing this public forum. Appreciate the introduction to amazing author and these personal stories too. I agree. There was someone in the Q&A. This is about another article that you wrote, Brea. Brea, I would like to read your article on the 1921 Tulsa massacre. It's believed that my family has a connection to the tragedy. This is from Arlene. Can you give me a reference link or thanks, or I guess any maybe a link to the article or?
Yeah, I know someone already dropped the article in the chat, so thank you for that.
Okay.
And I'll just bump it for you. And I would also say that if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to visit Tulsa. I did get to visit Tulsa during the book tour. And the record keeping around the massacre is both beautiful and really sad, but I think you'll be able to find a lot of information directly there. So there's a really beautiful museum called Greenwood Rising, and it doesn't just start with the massacre, which I love. It doesn't just start with the violence. It recreates what a lot of these Black businesses did look like, and how thriving the Black community in Tulsa was, and so that's really important. And then it shows all of the loss that happened, of course. But also, just as you walk around Tulsa, if you look down, like in the sidewalk, there are little plaques, and it'll say there used to be a Black-owned, shoe repair shop here, and it was burned down on this day in 1921. And here used to be a dry cleaners. And I mean, obviously, when you're in Greenwood, it's like every other business there's a plaque where it used to be a Black business, and then it starts to get more interspersed. But yeah, so there's a lot that you can find by visiting, and I think it would be so important. I mean, I think it's one of those things that I think every Black person should go to: the EJI Museum in Alabama and the Greenwood Rising Museum in Oklahoma. I think it's an important record keeping of what had taken place there. And for someone who thinks there might be a tie, I think you'll be able to better understand what your family's life might have been there.
That's great. Thank you. I'm just, as I'm scrolling through the comments, I saw my colleague Beth, who is our rock on this program, making sure everything's going smoothly, sharing a lot of the links in the comments, I believe here on Facebook. So thank you again. And also just our colleague, NPL colleague Dale, who also just left a comment. Good evening all. Sis Baker, awesome analysis of our choices related to sustainability. And I believe Arlene mentioned the New Jersey reparations task force. So just a couple comments from some of the earlier stuff. But just for any folks, I think we might still try to open up for questions. If there's any additional questions, we'll be wrapping in about 15 minutes. So, I want to, there's so many questions I have in front of me that I want to ask. We may just have to do like a part 2, maybe, I don't know, a series, podcast. I could listen to y'all all day, so I'll just sit it out.
We should make all that happen.
Absolutely.
And this was, I want to thank you, Reggie, and the North Public Library. This is a great find. I knew nothing about Brea Baker. I knew nothing about her book until it was brought to my attention. So I want to thank you and your team over there at the North Public Library as well.
Yes, no, seriously, thank you so much. And this feels so full circle. I have so much family in Newark and Patterson. Nice. And as was mentioned earlier with Noel, Newark is such an important Great Migration destination city. So this is an important history that a lot of Black Newark residents have, is a Southern tie. And maybe it's like, oh, my grandmother used to have some land, or I think we used to be from here. And I just encourage anyone listening to ask any of your living elders these questions. Do not wait. I wish, there's so many times during this book process, I wish I could have interviewed my grandfather, but I just hope that it encourages us to have more community convos, for people to support the work of people like Tobias, and realize that it literally is so central to any liberation work for us to be autonomous, to have self-determination. And we can't have that if we are constantly at the behest of a bank, a landlord, someone else, right? So it's so important that we own our homes and some land for ourselves. And I encourage y'all to look into how you can do that as families and as communities.
I love that. That's very important. And yes, absolutely. I think when I talked to you, Brea, I talked about my my pop 99 World War II veteran, and it's just important to just sit and, sometimes I find myself sitting to discuss one thing and just learning a whole other world of history outside of that. So very important to take advantage of those connections that we have here.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Arlene, I just see, yes, this will be available on YouTube. Yeah, just saw that in the comments, and absolutely Tulsa is important. So I think as we kind of wind down, I just wanted to sort of leave space for final thoughts, and also just kind of, before I forget, because one of the things as we start to wind down, I start to forget. I did want to share contacts or have you share the best contacts for anybody who wants to continue to follow your work. So if if you want to just do that for the audience.
Yes. So again, my name is Brea Baker. You can follow me on social media at Freckled While Black. I'm going to type that into the chat for y'all. And my website is breabaker.com.
Word. And brother Tobias, your work and how we can contact and support your work as well.
Sure. I am typing out the website, sasglocal.com. And then we are all over social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at North SAS.
Word. And I do want to just say, anybody doing research here in New Jersey, please utilize our great New Jersey room, doing family history, NPL, available for that. And then as far as just our programs that we have, anything else upcoming, you can always follow us with the James Brown African American Room, JBAAR_NPL.org. Sure she's still tuned in. So shout out to Alicia Grant for the connection with brother Tobias. I hope we get to collaborate again with both of you. Actually, just again, we could do another hour of this, and I would gladly sit here. But yeah, I just thank everybody for joining us and support coming out. Please go out, support Brea's book. Again, amazing read. So much history in there. We didn't even get into the USDA stuff. That's a whole
Woo! We gotta have a part 2 on that one. Gotta have a
absolutely.
part 2.
That might be a whole program. So maybe we might need to discuss sequels or just
That'd be
something.
nice. We should definitely do that.
Absolutely, at any time. So oh yeah, and IG, yeah, JBAAR 2A's _NPL. So I want to thank you all again for joining us. On behalf of the Newark Public Library, my esteemed guests, appreciate y'all so much and what y'all are doing. Thank you all. And yeah, that's a wrap.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Have a good one, Reggie. Have a good one, Tobias.
You too.
Talk to
Thank
y'all
you
soon.
All right, peace. Be good.
Take care. Peace.
All right, peace. Thank you.